John will share with us his expertise on state finance and the critical issues impacting the state's budget for the remaining biennium, the next biennium, and what this means for Minnesotans for years to come. John draws on a distinguished 40-year career to offer entertaining and common-sense revelations into how government really works and how it should work. His nonpartisan lessons are widely respected by citizens, bureaucrats, and politicians alike. John is in a unique position to know the inside story because he's been there. He's currently city manager of Minnetonka, previously served as the first finance director for the city of Minneapolis, and was Minnesota's finance commissioner in the Carlson administration. John was also partner with the largest economic consulting firm in the Rocky Mountains, ran Minnesotans' original and largest internet company, and was an executive with Minnesota Public Radio. John has taught at several universities and has degrees in finance and economics from the U.S. Air Force Academy, UCLA, and the University of Colorado. He has authored numerous articles and books and occasionally writes political commentary. So please join me in a warm welcome for John Gunyou.
Well, Danette spoiled my surprise of the three. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I did want to thank Twin West. My chamber serves our community, and I've lived in a number of different places and worked in a number of different places, and I've always valued the relationship we've had with government and business, and I think the Twin West really does, set the example of how that should be a positive relationship. So I thank you for that. So. That was my commercial. So I'd like to take some time today to just, I guess you said revelations. So I guess revelations in kind of the state budget issues that we're facing, and they tend to be focused on the near term, and I think that's unfortunate because a couple of people made notice that there are some long-term challenges we have, and I think that's important to keep in front of us. What we're seeing now is the immediate budget. We're halfway through the 2-year period that the state deals with on a budgeting basis, and they're balancing that piece of it. But as was mentioned by one of our legislators, in fact, all three legislators represent my community, so thank you for being here for that. The next budget is considerably more challenging than the one we're dealing with today. And I think it's significant that, as was mentioned, this is kind of the triple witching hour where every state office is up for election. So all 201 legislators, every constitutional office, the governor, we will have a new governor and a new legislature next year, and so they'll have to be dealing with the budget challenges for next year. And then finally, the long term, if I haven't thoroughly depressed you by that point, I'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges we're looking at in the coming decades. And so the first two challenges, this is, actually I've been using this slide for a number of months now, and it turned out to be strangely prophetic because you might remember a few weeks ago we were talking about $1 billion problem for the remainder of this biennium, and I had always included the unallotments as a just remember in case the court decides a certain way, which they did now. It then became a $3.7 billion problem. Actually, the discussion now is the $3 billion. It's because the legislature actually enacted some things last year, and then there are a number of bills this year that have already been passed and that the governor has signed. So they have whittled that down somewhat. The next term, though, is considerably more challenging, and this is the forecast. Oh, I should mention, I'm not making up these numbers. These are numbers from the Department of Finance. You'll see them, a little different order that I've put them in, but when I was finance commissioner, I used to make them up, but now I'm using their numbers. But I said that at one group, and someone shouted out, "I always suspected that of you, Gunyou." 5.8 billion is the number. And what they do this session, in other words, will have some bearing on that. So if there are some permanent changes enacted, then that will whittle that down. Unfortunately, as has been the case in quite a few years now, a lot of the solutions have been one time. And so it sort of rolls over the problem, and it doesn't whittle much off of that future problem. Minnesota has kind of a curious, well, I've been pretty critical of it, so I guess I wouldn't say curious, I'd say incorrect practice of, in the way we treat inflation in the forecasts. And it's actually in state law. We're the only state that does that, and that we say you count inflation in the revenue, but you ignore it in the spending. And it's not even the federal government does that, and heavens knows they're not the standard for financial management, I think. But I think the reason that's such a bad practice is that it doesn't give you an accurate picture. I mean, we wouldn't think, I spent about a third of my career in the private sector, and I would never think about forecasting, you know, my finances and say, I'm going to pretend that none of my employees ever get a raise when I'm projecting costs. And I am going to pretend, though, that the cost of goods will go up, and so I'll get more income by that. So the problem is that when you make things look better than they are, then I'm not sure we make as good a decisions and choices from a policy. So if you want to cut taxes, then you say, we can afford that. If you want to start new programs, you say, we can afford that, when in reality, neither is the case. And so I think we need to start from an accurate forecast and then make choices. I mean, during the Carlson years, we had the accurate forecast, but then we chose not to fully fund inflation. I mean, that's a policy choice, but at least you know where you're starting from. But if you look at that, it's a 20% problem. And so that's fairly significant, especially on the tail of the shortfalls we've had over the past 6 to 8, 10 years. So it's a fairly significant bogey to try to hit. So let me, I always like to show this picture. It's every once in a while they trot out all the former has-beens. And this was a group, we were at the, I think this one was in the Senate. We were in last year's legislative session. That Jake Kudrowski's on the left. He was Rudy Perpich's finance commissioner. I worked for Arnie. Peggy Ingeson was Governor Palente's finance commissioner. And Pam Wheelock was Jesse Ventura's finance commissioner. And the reason I put this in was I don't think I've ever seen a more dour-looking group. And I think it's because we knew what the issue was here, and it was what we were in for. So like I said, they trot us out and have us say negative things and bad things, and things are bad, and then they trot along, I guess. But it's, I should confess that you heard my background's economics, and they call that the dismal science for a reason, and that's because I tend to be fairly pessimistic about things. So what's the first challenge was that $1 billion, so now 3.7. So here's how we kind of got there and what's happening now. So I thought it might be useful to kind of show what happened last year. This was the way the system works, as I'm sure many of you know, is the governor, well, as D. Long, a former speaker, used to say, the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. And so that's kind of the way the system works. And so the governor starts with the budget, and last year this was the governor's proposal. About $800 million of federal money. The shifts were about $1.9 billion. Those are primarily the school shifts. He actually proposed some other shifts, and I think the best way to look at, without a long, detailed explanation, is actually a whole series of shifts, but it's basically a one-year cut, is what it amounts to. You're delaying payments for a year, but then it returns the following year, if there's the money. Of course, that's kind of the kicker, but it's a one-year shift over the end of the fiscal period. So it's the state's books and the school's books don't line up, so it's a way to save money one time. Some cuts, about $800 million of cuts, and then about $1 billion of a borrowing proposal that didn't go very far, and I think it was pretty much universally panned. Nobody thought it was a good idea. What it amounted to was as part of the tobacco settlement, you might remember there was $1 billion in a trust fund that was set up. The state used that 6 years ago, I think, was when to fix that problem. But there was also usually trust funds last more than a couple of years. I mean, they use the interest, but that one didn't.